Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live, something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. to figure out what the future is for smarter buildings. Our profiles, if you wonder who we are listed on mondaylive.org. So head over there to see all the links to our profiles. Just to point out, the views expressed here in this hour are personal and not of any company or organization, so keep that in mind. And let's make this as interactive as possible on the Zoom chat with questions and comments. That would be appreciated. And if you want any of the links that's on this deck, it's on mondaylive.org as well on the homepage, if you scroll down a little bit. So this is the last show of July, where we have been talking about disruption and how the building automation industry is going to be disrupted or will be disrupted. So we'll continue that conversation for one more week and before we head for summer breaks. And so the agenda, normal news and trends, and then having spent 3 weeks talking about disruption from different angles, we really want to focus on how do we realize the vision that we've been talking about the last 3 weeks. This is the cloud native building vision. So that's going to be the focus of this conversation. And then hopefully a lot of discussion. Just a reminder, we're going dark from next week onwards. We're going on summer vacation, not all together, but we're hopefully going to be having fun for summer, and then we'll be back. We will be back on Monday, September 11th. So that should be great.
First of all, Anto, I thought we were going to see Jim up at the vineyard.
We can do that as well.
That was the plan. I thought it was on the boat too.
All right. So, Ken, let's start with you. What's going on?
Okay, great. We've been having a lot of chatter about how do we get our message out beyond our industry, I think is the focus we had. In our Wednesday meeting, there was some discussion about how we are becoming part of necessary infrastructure, which I think is a big boost. So it gives us a whole new audience of people we can talk to. I've been doing some work with Eric, and we've been trying to figure out how to first catch people's attention. And then we have another problem is actually when we catch people's attention, what do we do with it? So we come up with a nice social media post and we link them back to some of our stuff. And that has caused me to working on an article called Adding English Subtitles to Our Industry Propeller Heads Prop Wash. And I think that's where we're at, is we must improve the narrative and build bridges between eye-catching social media posts and the transition entry into our Techno Talk power posts riddled with annoying acronyms. We must provide an English subtitle to help sell our foreign worded content to the masses. I think we've been suffering from this problem and we haven't kind of recognized it, but we've been chatting and trying to figure out how to reinvent automated buildings. And automated buildings is a collection of propeller heads talking to propeller heads in our industry. And when you jump in and you don't have a dictionary of acronyms, it can be pretty confusing. And to basically kind of add credibility to that, we're just in this situation where we got this giant word called kabashery, or whatever you want to call that. And yeah, that's pretty clear. So I think we really need to work on, every time we write a piece, we have to do a English subtitle portion to provide that transition from the eye-catching social media to our technical stuff. Don't get me wrong, I am extremely pleased of all of the strong technical talk we have on automated buildings. But sometimes when I read it, it makes my head hurt. And the purpose it's there is that it's important to 100, 200, 300 people that basically function in that community. But when we invite people into that community from social media, I think we need English subtitles. So that's my message for today.
So Ken, I was talking this morning. It's a great topic. I mean, you could take that to life. But I was talking to somebody who's out in the industry and all that, and he was saying that part of the issue, right along with what you're saying, is people always talk about the how rather than the why. And if we could shift that context, all of a sudden, all the jargon sort of dissipates. But it's an excellent point.
Good.
Yeah, good point, Ken.
I do, just on that, sorry to go back a second. So where do you think the breakdown is, Ken? I mean, propeller heads are always, the engineers are always going to talk to engineers and engineering lingo because it's shorthand and it's expedient and stuff. So is the breakdown in the marketing or the understanding of it, or?
Well, I think what we're doing, what I'm finding, I'm guilty of this, is what sort of happens, it's an evolutionary step, is you start using some of this whiz-bang marketing tricks on social media, and all of a sudden you capture a bunch of people, and then you take them to our articles that haven't been massaged to do it. I'm thinking that the English subtitle, for some people, in fact, a lot of the people, will in fact be the message. So in fact, having some marketing people take a look at your prop wash, the idea would be to just try and make that transition, build that bridge. I think there's a lot of people who just want to understand that article, but not read it, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? But just, and it's not that easy to try and describe what we're trying to do in some of those articles. I look at them and, you know, I have an inkling of what you guys are talking about, but sometimes even my head just overloads.
It takes effort to simplify a message and simplify the words. And a lot of people don't make that effort. So totally get it.
And I think that's part of marketing. And I think Mark Peacock does a good job.
Part of marketing. But I'll tell you what, if you're your run-of-the-mill salesperson, you could take the prop wash, as Ken says, from engineering, from product development, and spend the time to turn it into simple language. Talk about being a practitioner, a sales practitioner. That's how you go sell stuff.
Yeah. I think that's a valuable commodity that we need to develop as an industry. And I'm finding that that's something I'm working hard at, automated buildings, to try and get that transitionary stuff in line.
Yeah.
So,
all right, let's move on. Thanks for that, Ken. So my slide today is about the most influential company in Silicon Valley that no one has ever heard of. Anybody want to guess who I'm talking about? Obviously not, because you would probably have not heard of this. And this is following, last week I was talking about the BlackBerry movie. I highly recommend you watch this movie here. It's about a company called General Magic. And they were around in the early 90s, and they went defunct in about 10 years later. They amassed somewhere around $200 million of investment, about half of it public on an IPO. But they sold maybe about 3,000 of these devices that you see here. It's running an operating system that looks like this. This is back in the early 90s. So it was really ahead of its time, but in the implementation, it was really weak. It was too early for its time. I was actually one of the muggins that actually bought one of these back then for $800, and obviously there's no wireless or anything like that. It was really very clumsy, but I thought it was a cool thing, so I still have it, but I couldn't find it. I was going to show it to you guys. Anyway, recommend you watch it. It is about disruption, but disruption in a sort of a different way. It's really basically about a group of people that got together to design this device. A lot of the people came out of Apple. It was partly funded by Apple, and then they created this. But guess what? They got disrupted at the end by Apple because of all the timing. So anyway, highly recommend it. One of the key characters in General Magic is a guy by the name of Tony Fadell, who you may recognize as being the guy that started Nest, that then sold it to Google. So it's actually the sort of the origin story of a lot of people, including Tony Fadell.
Well, the missing part you mentioned with Tony. Tony was, of course, the guy who did the iPod for Apple. So he invented the click wheel, and he was the guy who really drove the iPod invention at Apple before he left.
And this actually goes through all of that, the whole story. I mean, it's not about him, but he's kind of one of the threads. Very interesting. So,
but I think just, and don't forsake that, the important message here is oftentimes, you know, it's like people forget when Apple comes out with the iPhone, and it's quote unquote revolutionary and different and all that sort of stuff. There are a lot of background stories that tie together to get to that particular point that, you know, is quickly washed over. You know, it's like the question that the reporter asked you, how does it feel to become an overnight success? So the guy goes, well, I've been at it for 15 years, but sure, you know, overnight.
Totally. So between that and the movie that I talked about last week, BlackBerry, I think these are two very sort of interesting perspectives. Interestingly enough, they kind of end in the same place by Apple disrupting them, but sort of a different history, obviously. So highly recommend both General Magic and BlackBerry if you haven't seen those two. Rick.
Yeah, the Coalition for Smarter Buildings update. Look, we have an announcement. We're going to be having what we're going to call office hours once a month on the first Thursday, 11 o'clock Eastern. It'll be an opportunity for people to participate in updates of what's been happening with the specific things that are going on inside of the coalition, the work that the coalition is doing. And, you know, to the point of the how or the why, you know, we as the coalition have kind of dug into the nuts and bolts of the how things are going to actually get better and become different. And things like the IBB, what we're doing with, you know, using and demonstrating IDLs, showing what interoperability actually, what the challenges are and what it looks like when you overcome them. You know, those will be the committee actions, the committee updates will happen during those office hours. And there can also then be discussion about, you know, what else we should potentially be working on that, again, our focus being sort of uniquely around that, the how or the what of smarter buildings. And, you know, as we're trying to accelerate the adoption of smarter building technology and accelerate this disruption that we're talking about today, it's always really useful to have examples of large entities that are asking for the disruptive technologies to be integrated and brought to market. And I was kind of looking at the attendee list and realized, well, half of you guys are my former bosses. That's sad, but I was just going to throw that out there. But there's also, I saw that one of the guests is from Infrastructure Ontario, where she is heading the effort to bring all sorts of technologies together into a platform that makes the running of buildings better, smarter, faster, more efficient, brings technologies more unified. And it's just really great to know that there are people that are actually out there putting RFPs on the street or putting RFPs together that are asking for that integrated experience. And we wish that we were a little further along in proving how easy it could be. But that is that's where the work that we're doing at the coalition, and then what people are doing, like Infrastructure Ontario, and asking for it is, you know, the time is coming.
Great, thank you, Rick. Just various links that we leave up here for you, and this probably needs updating, which I'll do. And incidentally, this event is actually not on this page yet, but it will be. So it will be on the c4sb.org website, and it'll be highly promoted on LinkedIn as well. We actually don't have any additional Monday Live shows between now and this date, so this is why we brought it up here, despite the fact that it's not actually on the website. So, but hope you can join us there. Any other thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, just want to make sure everybody saw, if you didn't, last week, the SEC rules required U.S. companies to reveal cyber attacks within 4 days. And so it's a new rule that it's for publicly traded companies must publicize details of their cyber attack within 4 days of identifying that it has material impact on their finances, making a shift in how computer breaches are disclosed. So I think as cyber continues the journey, and especially in our industry, we will be affected or are affected by that particular rule as well. So thought it was interesting that it's made its rounds and it's active now, I guess.
There's another thing that's going on in DC, which is the US federal government is launching a thing called the US Cyber Trust Mark. All indications so far suggest that it's pointed mostly at IoT devices for consumers.
Yeah.
But we're trying to find out if there's any relevance to the commercial building sector. So not quite sure about that yet, but that's kind of an interesting that they're trying to sort of standardize how you present your cyber credentials, cybersecurity credentials. All right, if there's nothing else, let's move on. So we are disrupting buildings. Again, for those who are wondering what this picture is all about, this is about Henry Ford's quote that if you'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And this is kind of the combination of those as an image. It's kind of interesting. So cloud native buildings is what we sort of have stated this month as being the vision that we've sort of presented to the industry or are presenting to the industry. And really this week's conversation is really all about how do we realize that vision? How do we make it a reality? So we started off, I'm just going to run through what we did in July. We started off talking about cloud native buildings and the vision of that and what that's all about. We spent quite a bit of time talking about what cloud native is all about, and specifically what cloud native buildings is all about. And cloud native is really about aggregating all of the different cloud assets, whether they're public clouds like Amazon and Azure and Google, with the private cloud that many building owners now have, but also including in that the on-prem systems that exist in our buildings, right? So collectively, all of these things need to be architected so that they can easily work with each other. Right now, that's not the case. There's a barrier really between the on-prem and the cloud side of things. We talked quite a bit about this concept of the IBB, the interoperable building blocks, that the coalition is working to specify, to standardize that interface, to make it so that that interface looks the same as any public or private cloud system. So everything looks the same, then the whole thing becomes a computing platform that we can then leverage a lot of value out of. So we talked about that. We talked about the why cloud native buildings. And really two things came out. This is on the second week of July. First is the owners and operators are already there. They're already committed to cloud native for their enterprise systems. So really what they need is information. Here, they're not really, when we're talking about these issues, they're not really looking at the controls, the temperature and everything else. There obviously are some parts of the companies doing that, but the focus here is really about the information about those systems. It's not about controlling, it's not about control systems, it's about the information about control systems. So we as an industry really must focus on offering building information technology, which shouldn't be hard because that's really information technology with the word building stuck in front of it. So we spend quite a bit of time on the smarter stack, thinking about the IBB, where it fits into this in terms of where applications and other things can exist either in the cloud or in the IBB. We talked about this in the context of other sort of analogs that we see in our world today. Tesla cars being one of them. So in many ways, it's similar to a building because there's a lot of control elements, but obviously it's very different in terms of how it comes to market and the experience that one gets from cars such as that. And, you know, we spend quite a bit of time and talking about this, that it's really at the end of the day, it's about the experience. You know, a lot of the technology is actually the same, but the way it actually gets aggregated so that it creates an experience, a really completely different experience, is really what this, in many ways, what disruption is all about. And again, going back to General Magic and BlackBerry, there's a lot of that in this as well. So can't forget that word experience. And I couldn't figure out what image to put for experience, so I found this lady and thought this would just do it. So, but the experience, and this is the other part of it, the experience is something that we enjoy today, right? All of us have smartphones in our pockets or in our purse, whatever, and we are enjoying cloud native device, cloud native us. The phone makes us cloud native. And these are the attributes of what cloud native is all about. It's always connected to the cloud. Although the day-to-day operations are not dependent on the cloud, because I can use the phone to make a phone call, that's not really using the cloud. But when it can leverage the cloud resources when necessary, it's all part of the owner's environment, can be managed location and vendor doesn't really matter, and it's scalable and secure, and it's all based on open and interoperable standards. So the question that we'd like to this show to start and hopefully make this into a summer assignment is, which one of these are you? Are you driving disruption? Are you accepting disruption is going to happen? Or are you going to resist disruption? So the thinking here is that we'll discuss this obviously now. I'll open the floor up to the panel, but let's use this to think about. Let's use the summer break to think about this, to think about the disruption. We kind of know the contours of the disruption that we're talking about, and where do we fit in it, and what is it? How are we thinking about our role in it? Is really kind of what I think we should be discussing. So I'll turn it over to the floor. Anybody want to start?
Actually, Andrew, can you go back to that list of what cloud native is? So there you go, thanks. So I think that gives us better context to talk to where you fit in the equation. I like the resisting the disruption, right? Because I think when we first started off with your photo of the Model T and the horse, and I think when I did some research on that whole statement from Henry Ford, when you ask the market, they just tell you, I want a faster horse. And back in those days, when the car was starting to come out, there was actually active federal government funding here in the US to make horses faster with feeds and breeding and all sorts of stuff. And they were there trying to show that, yes, we can make horses faster and that's all you need. So I think a lot of times from a disruptive perspective, it's always fun to see what the reaction of a disruptor is, right? How does a disruptor react to what you're doing? How do you, in fact, to the BlackBerry one was a great example, that when they got disrupted at the end, by iPhone, the big part of the disruption was the fact there was no keys and there was no keyboards. you know, and a big part of BlackBerry's value proposition in BlackBerry's minds, you know, the founders, was that you had to have a keyboard. Everybody wanted this keyboard, and iPhone came out with no keyboard, if you all remember that phase.
Yeah.
But as being disrupted themselves, you know, their response was, well, we're just going to make this thing with the sliding keyboard that pops out, so you still have the keyboard, but you have all the space on the screen that iPhone was promising. So, you know, oftentimes it's fun to watch what the reaction of those resisting disruption do, you know, to come out and react to what you're doing.
Mm. You know,
let me ask a question on that. I know, you know, there isn't anybody on the phone on this call, either you know, any of the participants. I don't think there's many people in the industry, the owners and everybody else. So what's holding back the disruption? Is not the technology, because we got that available. We've all said that many times. You know, is it the lack of entrepreneurs to actually drive the thing on? You know, is it just you know, timing? What is it or is it large corporations? What's stopping the industry being disruptive? Because there's everybody you talk to wants and sees where it's eventually going. It's just, how's it going to get driven there? What's missing? Why isn't there? Why isn't it happening?
Yeah, and we kind of touched on this during the few weeks discussion too, right? One of the interesting things from my perspective is, if you look at all the parallel examples, you know, there was this one force of power, one force of character, right? So Steve Jobs and you know, Bill Gates and, you know, and Elon Musk, right? I never get the sense that disruption comes from an organization, right? Like you don't really think of the disruption that Apple caused. You think of the disruption that Steve Jobs caused. He had just happened to be with Apple. That was just the vehicle of the delivery thing. You never think of, oh, this large companies are not a thing that can cause a disruption. There's usually some driving force, impetus behind. And as Mark says, you know, Jeff Bezos, right, at Amazon, there's some driving force person that is really behind the thing. And Tony Fadell at Apple, you know, with the iPod and the click wheel thing.
But they were all kind of pushing stuff that we didn't even know we wanted, whereas everybody on this call is kind of saying, we know what we want, but nobody's actually, you know, doing it or getting on with it. And it's,
so maybe we're
why
wrong.
not?
So maybe we're wrong about what they want.
Maybe.
And so the other thing is, so, you know, I work at Next, and Steve would say that the technology didn't exist until him and Ari and a few other people, created it. And the tech actually then triggered an awakening of a realization. So yeah, there was always a personality behind it, but there was also a thing that could be held up, a thing that could be drawn on a whiteboard, and so I'm always that one that's going to challenge back that it requires a prophet figure or Jesus figure, whatever people call those guys. I don't think it does. I think it actually takes a step forward in tech, and that's what we're seeing now. Cloud native is a step forward in tech that didn't exist 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and cloud native now allows for that tech to advance more rapidly. So that's my 2 cents.
I guess, Rick, we're not going to create the tech. You know, we're just going to adopt what somebody else has done, because we're not that sort of industry. But we're going to adopt whatever tech there is out there, and it's a matter of then looking, as you say, for the leader maybe, or something, or someone, or some business to actually really drive that kind of default solution.
To your question of, are we missing a company or an entrepreneur that will adopt some of these technologies and put it together and take it to market in a new way, so some of these owners can buy it in a new way? Yeah.
It's interesting. If you think about what Anno said and the question Roger asked, those guys who were trying to design a better horse, better feed, whatever, they actually thought they were the disruptors. I bet they were going, oh yeah, we're going to be the disruptors here. So the question is, also to your question, Rick, do we know what we want? Are the disruptors out there, quote unquote, actually disruptors or just iterative approaches? I wonder if we even know what the heck we want.
I was going to add that. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, go back to that, your ending slide you just had up there, and a question for the group. So here's the question. So per Bezos, you got to invent to disrupt. All right, I think that's a foregone conclusion. Some of the chatter here is, people just build stuff because it's cool. All right, so then my question for the group is this. Does one disrupt if you're not going to make money? In other words, I'm inventing the latest and greatest thing. Hopefully it might be what a customer wants and will buy. And where does making money play in this whole disruption? I leave it up to my colleagues to ponder.
If you look
let me jump in.
Look at Uber, Uber hasn't made money yet.
Well, but their intent is certainly to make money. So I would put it at the top of the list, right? That's where the funding and everything comes from. But the point I wanted to make, is it safe to say, just addressing this question specifically, that at any point in time, we or a company may be all three of these or any combination of these, right? I can think of instances where we're driving, others were accepting, and others were definitely resisting, right? So I think we need to acknowledge that these probably exist simultaneously in an entity that's trying to move the market forward.
But that would be, in a way, a wonderful thing, because if I knew that by doing A, I'm actually driving disruption, and by doing C, I'm actually resisting it, right? Is there not a question that should you really be doing C? Right? Should you be doing?
I'll give you the use case for that specifically. What I was thinking about is if there is a status quo or an incumbent on there, and I have something new, I'm going to consider myself driving disruption. However, if I'm the incumbent and I have, the thing that's already there, even if I'm introducing some aspect of my platform, let's say that's new, the rest of it I'm going to resist and say, oh, you don't need that other new thing. What we already have is great, right? So I think in any given interaction with a kind of a complex sort of a platform or situation, that's why I think you could be playing any one of these roles or all three at the same time.
Yeah, and I think the other one, guys, is to recognize that oftentimes even the ones who are, the Steve Jobs and the Bezos and those of the world, don't quite know what it is either when they first come out with it. So my classic story is the guy who invented TiVo. If you guys have been around in the day of TiVo, which was the first generation of DVRs, right, back in the day. And if you look back into his history, when he actually first created TiVo, his whole purpose was to make it easier for his mum to program TiVo, to program recording, a show that's going to happen in 2 or 3 hours compared to the old clunky, VCR with all the buttons and all the programming and the hours and stuff, which his mum never really got onto. And so he employed all these gaming software kids to come in and create this whole UX experience so that his mum could just do point and click and do better recording. Wasn't very successful initially. He really didn't get it off the ground. It didn't really make any big disruption. Nobody really could understand the why of why this UX was all that much better. And what he ended up doing was he got a whole bunch of kids from college just to go out during the summer, and he armed each he armed 2 kids each with a TiVo, and he went out to these shopping malls, and he thought, well, we just show the customer how to do it, they'll love it. It turned out that one particular shopping mall, suddenly the sales went through the roof. They were selling TiVos left, right, and center. And he got the 2 kids in, and he asked them, what did you say that made people understand what we're trying to do? And he said, well, I was talking to this guy, and he came in, and I was showing him TiVo and how he could pause live TV, so that if you're sitting watching the football on the Sunday, he could hit the pause button, go get a beer, come back and continue. That was the thing that changed everything in DVR, that you could actually pause live TV while you went and answered the door. And he changed his whole business model based on that from what he was originally doing. So oftentimes you don't know you're doing what you're disrupting until the market tells you what is actually the thing that was going to change.
Good point.
All of the points that have been made so far regard consumer marketing and consumer markets. So it will surprise none of you that I will return us to the drudgery of talking about procurement in our industry as being the break point that prevents this disruption from happening. Don't laugh too hard, Mark. You're muted.
I'm there with him.
You know what? I have a stopwatch here, and I'm waiting. You went too long, my friend. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, Riff, somebody needs to rebut that. Why are we going to break through, a 30-year industry where things change very slowly, where every dime spent is mapped into capital that is only put in at the beginning of a project, and then the assets have to sit 30 years before they can be disrupted again?
Well, it's going to be people. It's going to be people. Oh, I'm sorry. It's going to be people like our guest that's on here from Infrastructure Ontario that starts to put together purchasing packages that insist on things being integrated and insist on things being considered over a life cycle, a long-term contract. So it's going to be examples that we can then point to that are more than just the handful that, everybody gets tired of hearing about. Well, now we've got another one we're going to hear about, and now we're going to hear about another one. So procurements are being done differently by some entities, and the sheep that will follow will start to think about things in a more total cost of ownership, long-term managed services, products delivered as a service. It'll be because people are forging a way using new procurement models, and the like I said, the sheep will follow.
But I think, Rick, we got a situation where the REITs are, we've already said the owners are getting smarter and demanding more and things, and certainly the REITs, the guys who own the buildings, they own the real estate and everything, they're actually demanding it, but they're still appointing mechanical contractors and consultants who are the problem that Jim's, talking about. If you want to name names, these are the guys that are just saying, hey, go away. This is the way we do the business today, and that's the way it's staying. And we're going to drive the price down.
Which is why the conversation about building information a couple of weeks ago is important, because I think the statement that I made is that we're not in the controls and automation industry, really. We are in the industry of providing information about control and automation and about the building. It's not about the thing, it's about the information about the thing. And you could argue that that's a disruption because that didn't exist before, right? The concept of information about the building and focusing on that and deriving value purely out of the information really didn't exist.
But I'd argue, Anto, that it's that information is not used until afterwards, and it's not. During the construction phase, there is no occupants, there is no data. There should be all the infrastructure put in place, but it's not, because it's still the lowest cost. And it's not until you get the people in that people want to offer the services to actually utilize that data. So it's trying to break that kind of gap down there somehow.
Yeah, and that's obviously part of the sort of systemic negative loop that we're in, is that we have this procurement and operation process, and most of the focus of control and automation is in the procurement, but the information is actually used in the operation. Right? That's never thought of either in the operation, in the technology used in the operation, or when you're actually building it. But
the gap is that the REITs know they want it, and somehow they got to enforce it without going down the traditional route. And it's how do you get that direct connectivity between the providers and the solution providers, and make it work, right? Rather than just downloading it to people in between who don't really care because they're there just for one phase of the whole building exercise at the construction phase.
But isn't that the essence of the disruption we're talking about then?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's the bigger picture too, right? And I'm kind of with you on that too. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, Jim, we're not going to affect the change out of that VAV controller or that air handling unit controller per se. But I think we're talking more about what is all the ancillary technologies, analytics, IoT devices, experiences that we can actually make a difference to the occupant in the building or building owner, which includes, the cost, the operations, and the comfort aspects of it. So probably not going to make a change to the controllers per se, the hardware, but what can we do that impacts the rest of the envelope of the experience for that tenant, especially today with the change in return to offices and the downsizing and the resizing and the reallocations and stuff. So again, I think it's picking the thing that's going to make the difference, right? So we could use the Apple Steve Jobs example again. I mean, Apple was doing okay selling Macs and computers and stuff, but they didn't really blow out of the water until they sold an iPhone, which was not a computer. Because I think they kind of, not that I think they consciously made the decision, but, there wasn't much more that they could do to make the computer different other than, faster, which everyone was on the same. They just went off in a totally different direction.
But the disruption I'm hearing, and I agree with Anto on this, is that we need to declare the building automation business an uninteresting business and go and found a new business. Building information.
I think we have a glimmer of hope there in being recognized as part of infrastructure. I'm loving to see that word connected to building automation, carbon counting, ESGs, all of the things that we're doing. Let's raise it up to the level that it becomes a necessary infrastructure. And also we're in a situation where governments are receptive to funding improvements in infrastructure. Right away we think of rebuilding bridges, but rebuilding our communication system. And if we can be part of that, I think that's a glimmer of hope.
Tell you, there's some real value in what you guys are talking about, especially languaging this whole industry and creating a whole new context and all that. There's definitely something there. I mean, I'm thinking of our old buddy, and how we used to talk about, or maybe that was you, Jim. You guys, when I first came into this industry, you guys were so connected to the broom closet. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I really love the alternate languaging that the consumer can start to dance with.
So let me ask you this. Do you guys consider we are being disruptive right now in our present day because folks are using solutions, products, technology that we have in a different way than they did 5, 10, 15 years ago? You talked about energy. In other words, there's a different way in which that owners and operators, REITs, are getting outcomes from what we've been able to do in connectivity, integration, interoperability, and whatever.
Let me ask you, I was going to say, clarifying question on that. Do a lot of what we do, I think, is evolutionary, not revolutionary? Do we consider that disruption?
Yeah, it's slow. I mean,
It's
we've been doing the same thing in buildings for years. You know, how many ways can you control a boiler, chiller, air handling unit? As Jim said, we're done. You know, there's simple ways of putting controls in buildings that just, and yep, they need to be more, sort of connectivity and interoperability, but it's not about that anymore. And I think it's just been too slow, and we're not adopting it quick enough.
Well, the reverse compatibility is such an issue in buildings where it wasn't when Avi Tevanian created the iOS. He didn't have to worry about putting it onto a BlackBerry. He just put it onto a new device, off he went. Again, this is consumer stuff, but we're in the real world of, installed base that you can't just demand, install it, update overnight. And that reverse compatibility does mean evolution and sort of dragging forward old 40-year-old packet technology.
Is it disruptive when a building goes from, when they install IP controllers? Is that a disruptive move? Kind of is in a way. You don't think so, Rod?
No, I don't think so. I think that's just a vehicle for doing it. I mean, and some sense to what Rick is saying is that 70% of what we do is retrofit and refurb. But then again, all the people who used iPhones and did all the other stuff already had a mold and were already there. It's just getting them to adopt it and change it. It's even easier because they don't have to change much. The information's there. There's a way of getting the data out from the VAS or whatever else. It's a matter of getting people to think differently about what they're going to do with that information that we are talking about that's available.
So
that's right.
Roger, your point, the outcome or outcomes are different, right?
Well, they're totally different set of outcomes. If you're separating control and automation from information about control and automation about the buildings, the outcomes that you would be talking about in those two worlds is going to be completely different. One is going to be 72 degrees, and the other one's going to be profitability, efficiency, performance of building, blah, blah, blah. It's not about the same outcomes.
Right. Because there's today, my view is that there's operational outcomes, 75 degrees to your point, and there's business economic outcomes.
Right.
The way I manage that building and what I'm faced with today, the different challenges. But again, is disruption, the way I, again, look at it, to your point, Anto, information. It's what you do with that information and changing the paradigm going, I'm running the building completely or different than I did 5 years ago. That is disruption, if you ask me.
I think we need help with the narrative. I think we're so far in the woods here, we can't see the edge of the forest. And I think new people trying to understand what it is we're doing are a big key to just changing the narrative.
Yeah, and the other thing that we talked about is this thing, right? It's about the experience, right? The experience of, going back, whether it's BlackBerry or iPhone or even General Magic. I mean, that's what the focus of those disruption is, right? And, we've almost sort of skipped this word in the last 5 or 10 minutes of the conversation here. Because the experience, I mean, the interesting thing about experience is it actually goes to your old brain, to your monkey brain, right? So you don't actually analyze it. You kind of say, that's a good experience. I like it. I'll do more of it. And, obviously for us, it begs the question, where does the experience need to change?
So I think in our space, the experience has to be across the board, right? From the people who run the buildings to the people who operate the buildings to the people who own the buildings to the people who actually use the buildings, right? I mean, it has to. We have to exchange. We have to change that experience fundamentally across the board. Now, we could all individually pick a different piece, right? I mean, I could focus on occupants, right, as being the thing that I want to change, and someone else could focus in on the building owner's experience, right? You might not all be doing the same thing, but I do believe you've got to make the experience different for everybody. And again, I think, with the change in building occupancy, return to office, not return to office, coming back to some of the streams that we've got talking about here, there is a definite downward trend at the moment of people not coming back to offices. So, to Scott's point, that's where areas of opportunities get created, right? What is folks not coming back to office? What are the opportunities being created from an experience perspective that either will drive people back to the office because the experience is what they're looking for and can't get it at home? Or is it really the experience of the building owner about what am I going to do with all these, unused spaces that I've got? To Scott's point, there is a significant downward trend at the moment and no one's really figured that out. Right?
Yeah, who's reacting to that change? I know, is 3-day week or whatever it is. Who's actually reacting to that change? You're not seeing many people going, this is the way we're going to run a building instead now, or what we're going to do with the information. There's people playing around with it, but I don't see anybody really.
And that's kind of, I think that's my point though, Roger. If you're looking for the downward trends of changing and being disruptive, there is one that's significant, right? That is something that's been different in the last 2 or 3 years. And nobody has, to your point, I haven't seen it either. I haven't seen anyone really picking up that gauntlet, unless they're doing in the background. We haven't seen any manifestation of that yet, but no one's really picked up that gauntlet and said, here's how we can change that for the building owner or the tenant or whatever your focus is, in that downward trend.
And we've got so many other things that we know are kind of helping it for the perfect storm. The younger Generation Z and everyone else saying, hey, we do exactly to Anto's slide here. We want a better experience when we go in the office,
right.
And we have got an energy issue, and there is ESG. There's all these good things, but there's all the elements to actually make it, or provide a change. But I'm not sure I'm actually seeing it in the industry at the moment, other than a few people providing some services at the top end.
But isn't the experience we're talking about, the critical experience in this conversation, is about, since we've accepted that building information is really what we should be heading towards, or managing, or getting it, is the experience about gathering the information, making them work with each other, utilizing the information for whatever purpose, depending on the building type, et cetera, is that not the core experience that fundamentally is really hard because it's never been the focus of this industry? And is that not the thing that we really need to focus on, so that we can actually get that experience, so that we can extract the value out of the information, out of the building?
I disagree a little bit, Anto. I think what you're talking about is mechanics of all those pieces, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with improving the experience of the mechanics, but at the end of the day, Mark Peacock will probably chime in here somewhere. If you can't translate that to something meaningful, who's paying the bill, and again, if I use my example of returning to office, unless there's some compelling thing that you could do with that information that allows the occupants to go, hey, I really do want to come back to the office now, not because of a stick used by management or some weird incentives or whatever else, but because the tenant themselves want to return, because you're offering something significant. But what you're kind of talking about is more the mechanics of making that work.
I'm not sure, because we keep on hearing, and Rick keeps on talking about, I think very valid way, about owners wanting information to do something, and they can't get that information, or they can't easily get that information. To me, there's an experience. There's a negative experience going on there. That if we focus on that, does that not help that?
I still see that as mechanics. I'm not sure how that gets translated to something. I mean, there's experience. Everything's an experience, right? So what I'm focused on is what's the experience that someone's going to pay for, as opposed to, oh yeah, that's interesting. It's a new experience, but it's not compelling for me to do something different. So I'm kind of focused more on the experience.
Pain avoidance.
Yeah, as an example.
Well, because they're experiencing a lot of pain right now. That's Anto's point, is they're asking for things to be just a little less damn painful.
Yeah, and I get that. Don't get me wrong. I understand pain avoidance, but I do know that people pay more for a positive experience than they do for a negative experience, right? A non-negative experience, typically.
Well, maybe that's the question. What's the experience they're looking for? We've been delivering 70 degrees F and 50% RH buildings forever, right? Or meant to have been. But and this maybe is the challenge, is what is the experience the occupants are actually looking at that we're not delivering?
And that's my point, right? I think we're not picking that up. I think, and prior to COVID and prior to where we are with return to office, when everybody was in the office, we just made the assumption that, yeah, 72 degrees, lights on, doors locked is the experience everybody wants. Now that everyone's gone home, we're like, oh, shit, wasn't that the experience they wanted? And apparently it's not, right? So it's something more fundamental that we missed.
I think the other thing that we might be looking at too is that the experience they're looking for is the experience they have. And they're used to doing all of this stuff on their phone, and they come into our buildings and they can't do everything on their phone. So therefore they're frustrated. So I think rather than a new experience, I think they may be looking for a continuance of their experience. And the phone, I think, is the lead in on that. We all need to use that interface and surround it with narrative that tells them how we're doing this in the buildings and actually shows them.
All right, we're at the top of the hour, 4 o'clock, so we need to start to wrap. Anybody other than Roger wants to wrap? I say that because we've used Roger 2 times already in the last couple of weeks.
He was on a roll. I say we go 3 in a row.
Yeah,
thanks, Ben.
Let's get him to take us out.
Hey, okay, so, going back to Mark's question about making money and all this, do we really think that Jobs and Musk and all these guys didn't really want to make money out of this stuff? Of course they did, but when we didn't actually know we wanted the iPhone until we got it and people started showing us what it could do for us. And I think, really, as I said, buildings have been going long enough. We know what should have been supplied in that, and it's that 70 degrees F and 50 RH, and as you said, the doors locked, the lights on. So all that's past. It's then looking at what is that experience that we're not providing? What is it we're missing that we're not doing that people want? And it's down the whole chain, obviously, as well. So I think it's still an open, we haven't got a solution here. I think it's an open question that if you are the entrepreneur, if you are a corporation, if you are, any of these people who are in it, what is it that we should be providing that the new generation and that have, but we still got to overcome those challenges that Jim brought up, which is how do we connect the owners and the occupiers directly with the providers to actually make sure it happens and not get beaten up and broken down and thrown away en route at the beginning, because you need that infrastructure once the building's occupied, because that's when it really all starts.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Roger, again. And we'll get the video up tomorrow or Wednesday. And we're not going to be around for 5 weeks. So see you all on September 11th. I hope everybody has a great and safe summer set of activities. And we'll come back to this subject or a variation of this subject in September. So with that, bye all.
Yep. Hi. Thanks.
See y'all. Have a good August.
Bye-bye.
Bye.